and welcome to Book Solid. We're your hosts. I'm India.
And I'm Soraya, and today we're going to be discussing When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole.
Spoiler alert. Hey guys, just as a heads up, we will be revealing spoilers in this episode. If you haven't yet read the book or seen the show or film, this is a courteous reminder to proceed with caution. So, just jumping right in, this book.
Okay, honestly, so Indy and I, we usually like to save our conversations for when we're recording, just, to make sure we get everything out that we want to say. This one, it was near impossible to do that. We just talked about it for like an hour before we started recording because there's so much to be said. Like, I think I even texted you halfway through.
Yeah.
I was like, there's going to be a lot to unpack with this episode.
Yes, and I don't know, I just want to say at the top of the episode, something I think that's really important. So it was written by a Black woman, Alyssa Cole. As you guys know, we are both Black women. And so by having, I guess, like our perspective as Black people, and just speaking of myself real quick here, like, I can't stress enough how much this is not like, yes, it is a thriller. Yes, it's fiction, but there's a lot of it that's based in reality.
Mm-hmm.
And I know reading it, it might just be like, oh, she's doing this for shock value, or, oh, that was cringy. But like, guys, I can't stress enough. And we're going to talk about it because a lot of it, there's a lot of parallels to what's been going on this past summer, what's going on now. It's very, very timely, very, very pertinent. And it's not just for gimmicks,
No.
I want to say. But yes.
So we're going to flip this episode around a little bit. I know we usually take it character by character and then discuss the plot along the way. This one, we feel like there's so many critical elements of the plot that I think we're going to dedicate most of the episode to the plot itself. And, as characters come up, then we'll discuss them. But I guess I want to ask you your initial thoughts, or even as you were reading it, how did you feel?
Yeah, angry. No.
Livid.
Blood boiling. No. Well, but I want to say too, her writing style, and I think we were talking about this a little bit too, but like, it just leaps off the page. Like, there are times where I laughed out loud. I couldn't help but jot down certain quotes, like I know we're gonna get into, but like, the dialogue, the characters are so witty, and just like, I don't know, there were times where I'd read a whole paragraph and go back, not because I wasn't paying attention, but because like there were little references buried inside, and just, I don't know, interesting things going on there. But I was angry, and it was hard to read at times. At times I had to put it down. I know I say that every episode. I'm just dramatic too. Like, I want to stress that, guys. If you know me in real life, I'd be doing the most. But I actually did have to put this one down at times, and I think that's a sign of how good it was. One time, but a couple years ago when I was in school, one of my film professors, when we were writing our scripts, somebody asked him, how do you know when your script is good? How do you, like, what's a sign? And he basically said, if somebody gives a crap. Like, if you write something that causes people to feel things, you have done your job as an artist. You've caused someone to connect. And I felt definitely I connected with this book.
Yeah, I want to second that wholly and completely. It was incredibly hard to read at parts. Like, there was sometimes like, how am I going to get through this part?
Yeah.
Or how am I going to finish it? Because I'm angry, I'm hurt, I'm disgusted by the behavior of some of these people. And India finished it before me. And so I wanted to text her like every time, like, I can't believe that this has happened. Or, like, I can't move past this part. And like, I said it audibly many times, like, oh, this is a hard one to read. And there's phrases that we say often, like, oh my gosh, my jaw dropped, or like this, that, and the other. And usually when people say that, like, did their jaw actually drop? When someone's texting LOL, did you really laugh out loud? But no, when I say my jaw was dropping at parts, it was literally a gape. Okay. Like, I'm sitting here reading and just smacks the concrete. Like, it was,
yeah,
I'm at a loss, honestly, because there was just, it was a lot. Everything that was said were things that needed to be said and things that needed to be addressed. And I think we kind of said this before we started recording, but I feel like the way that Alyssa Cole was able to touch on so many important topics within this one book she really like just hit home. A lot of it hit home, and I think she did an amazing job of rolling all of these very real issues into one book. And we're going to get into more specific examples as we talk, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And I also wanted to add really quickly, just in case I forget as we get going here, but I mean, as you guys probably can tell, and we both talked about it, like we're very passionate about a lot of these topics. So I'm gonna try and like keep my cool because like I first was exposed to gentrification and like I started to hear about it in high school, but I didn't really understood what it meant. And then I got to college and I want to say it was like my second year of school. I was taking this class and we were studying gentrification in LA and we actually were I think we're supposed to take like a class field trip. Field trips in college, I know, but like it was a really small class and we were all going to go. But at the same time, I found out that so my family, my dad's great uncle, so my great great uncle, we call him Uncle Dad. He lived in LA all his life. My dad's from LA, and he had this house in South Central that like my whole family every summer we went. I love this house, guys. Like it's literally if you could bottle up the word warm, that's what I would associate with this house. Like I could still smell it. It was just joy and warm. I loved it. And I loved my Uncle Dad. He was just super dope, super cool, very big Dodgers fan. I was always like, Uncle Dad, I don't watch baseball. He's like, here's a bobblehead, a Dodgers bobblehead and Lakers and stuff. But when he passed, his house sold for $584,000. Now, he bought the house originally for about $34,000. So 584 versus 34. And that was in like, I want to say like 2016. And right now, today, actually, I found out that the house is currently almost $1 million. And like, from what I understand, there has been remodeling, but like, I just, for the life of me, I can't understand. Like, it's so hard for me to wrap my mind around that because like, it's just a regular working class neighborhood, or at least it was at the time. And so the fact that like, you know, I just feel so connected to this because like, yeah, like I said, like we would always go to his house and just like, why do people think that they can do that? Like, what are you gaining from this?
Exactly. No. And just like the personal connection that you have to this, something that is so very real. And that's something that really bothers me is like when gentrification comes up, and it's something that is approached multiple times in this novel of people trying to act like, well, what's so bad about it? What's the problem? They're making these neighborhoods better. They're improving the quality of life for these people. And it's like, no, you're trying to improve the quality of life for a very specific group of people. And so yeah, that's definitely something that, and I mean, obviously we can't have a novel about gentrification without that coming up, but that argument of people trying to be like, well, it's a good thing, and I appreciate that and granted, you know, this was taken a step further because it is a thriller, so to speak, but I love that she highlights so clearly what is so detrimental about it.
Right. Yeah, like, well, there's a new juice bar and there's a new thrift store, even though thrift stores are like donated like older clothing, but it's new and yeah.
Yep, there's even there's that part where I keep wanting to call him Kelly, like Kelly from Such a Fun Age. It's Theo, but in my mind I keep thinking of him as Kelly. But when he asked him to go to breakfast and he was like, oh, there's a new brunch place 3 blocks down where that Dominican restaurant used to be. And he says it so casually, like, oh, now we can get our vegan steak and egg scramble is basically what he's talking to her about in that scene. And I'm like, do you even realize like the magnitude of what you've just said? But like, no, you don't, you know?
Yeah. And just on a very base level, like what kind of person do you have to be to wake up and think, hey, I'm going to push a group of people out simply because I can, because I have the power and I have the resources. I don't care about who is there already. You know?
I want to live here now. It's mine. It's just history repeating itself. And just it's history repeating itself in such a way where people are now using law and, as we see in the book, like banking systems on their side. So it seems more, quote, organized than running into, you know, a piece of land and killing everyone there and removing them and then staking your claim.
And getting a holiday.
But it's essentially the same thing. It's the same practice. It's deciding that suddenly this land that is not yours that you want, you're going to push the native inhabitants out. And so now you can, you know, make your dwelling there. It's history repeating itself.
Absolutely. And I think that's a good point that you made in the book and IRL in real life. Like she said, the banks, guys, like banks are funding this or making it so that funds aren't there. You can't get a loan to do whatever you want to do. The practice of redlining. So that's why, so it goes from being, oh, this is unfair, like this is low key racist, to being systemic. So we have, there's literally systems in place to oppress people on a mass scale. Like what? It's baffling.
It's and that's another bringing it back to that argument of the disbelief of people like, well, that doesn't really exist. That doesn't really happen. No, it absolutely does. It absolutely does. And it's just, I'm going to go back to the word, to quote, organized. The racism is just more organized. It's more systemic, as you were saying. It's not, as blatant. I mean, it is, but we'll get to that. But it's keeping people from advancing, from opportunity, and keeping them at the mercy of, like we're saying, big banks, larger corporations.
Absolutely. Okay, so just kind of segueing into the beginning of the story, what were your thoughts on the character of Sydney early on?
So Sydney's going through it.
Yes.
Going through it. And when we talk about, all these elements that Alyssa Cole was really able to bring to life in the novel, I feel like anxiety is definitely one of them. I could feel her stress. I could feel her anxiety so clear. Like a lot of times when we were getting chapters for Sydney's perspective, I could feel myself feeling tense. Just, on behalf of reading how she's feeling and what she's going through. So I think that Alyssa Cole did an amazing job of showcasing exactly what Sydney is dealing with in this time in her life. I had a lot of questions because I was like, I want to know, what is going on to make Sydney feel this way? Because she would allude to her mother. She alluded to her ex-husband. I will say this, though. From the first time someone asked Sydney about her mom and she said, oh, she's in a nursing home, but I'll tell her you said hi, or however that conversation went, I knew she was dead.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, I don't know how
you picked up on that.
Yeah, I don't know how I knew, but I was like, okay, I feel like her mom is dead and she's covering for it. I didn't know that she had buried her. But I just felt like she had passed and she wasn't telling anyone because, obviously my very limited knowledge at the beginning of the book, I just assumed she didn't want people to know yet. I didn't know everything surrounding it.
Yeah, talk about weight. I got the sense in the beginning, the whole saying of feeling alone in a crowded room. So, Sydney's grown up in this neighborhood. She's got Mr. Perkins. They call him the mayor. He's just he's amazing. If this was a film, shout out to Mr. Perkins. But she has, I guess you could say to an extent, she has this support system, but I couldn't help but feel her isolation and her loneliness as she's trying to grapple with her rapidly changing community. And it's heartbreaking, we talk about nostalgia. I'm a very nostalgic person. I love my childhood shows and I think about that stuff a lot. But if you're literally living in that and you're watching stuff just change, how do you have an outlet for that? And she has her neighbors and they understand, but they're also processing it as well.
Yep.
And so it's this collective isolation and I'd even say grief in a way.
Yeah, especially she's coming off of, we know she recently moved back from Seattle. She had a disastrous marriage. We don't know the extent of what happened, but then when we do, it's goodness. He was manipulative, emotionally abusive, he was gaslighting her. So she's coming off of a very, I think he had her institutionalized at a point. So she's coming off of a very traumatic and emotional experience, seeking the comfort and familiarity of her home, of this place that she grew up, of her mother, her neighbors, and to come back and have that place be completely different. I imagine that feeling of hopelessness, of feeling lost, of where could I possibly go? What could I possibly do? Because there is nowhere that I feel comfortable, safe, at peace. She lost her mom. Sydney's going through it.
Yeah. And I couldn't help but draw parallels. One of my favorite movies of all time is Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing. And without spoiling that film too much, I'll just say the sense of, so she gets her sights set on doing this tour for their block party because she does a tour at the beginning of the book and it's this very gentrified, I'm just going to say scary for lack of a better term, the language in that tour.
Yes.
So we have that in the beginning of the book, and by the end of the book, things have exploded and they've just evolved into such a big situation that the tour is an afterthought. And in the film, Do the Right Thing, similarly, things kind of build up that way, that tension.
Yeah, let's talk about that tour, because I got mad beef. So, first of all, where do we even begin? I think my biggest complaint with the tour, so, you know, Zephyr, or whatever her name is the tour, or the person hosting it, and she's giving all these facts. They're not really about the neighborhood. They're about, you know, people who took this land years and years ago, or they're very, like, surface level facts. So obviously Sydney, having grown up there her entire life, is chiming in at certain parts, like, well, actually, you know, the person who lives there now, what did she say was, like, the first female, like, software engineer or something like that, like the first Black female software engineer, and, like, no one's amused by that fact. And then Sydney says something else, and basically the tour guide pipes up and is like, I appreciate the bonus information, but this tour is about historically important people. And the emphasis is on important, not historically, because, you know, those are the facts, quote, that she's trying to give. And, you know, they're trying to talk about the old history of the place, this, that, and the other. So if that was really the point, and she would have said this is about historically, important didn't even have to be there. Historic. Which there was a lot of Black history into this, or in this neighborhood. So for her to even say historic would be incorrect. But for her to put the emphasis on important, and what Sydney is bringing up are facts about the Black community. And I was like, okay, so you're telling us right there how you feel about Black people, about the people who are living in this neighborhood. The very important and very real facts are not important enough for you and for this tour. Oh, that made my blood boil.
Yeah, like it would be equivalent to going to an HBCU and being like, so let's talk about the slave plantation and, like, the slave masters and da-da-da. Like, what is wrong with you?
Yeah.
Why do you have no regard for, like, it was incredibly insensitive and just weird. And to be honest, I've okay, so as you guys know, we used to work together and we've had to give tours before. And, like, I know what it's like being a tour guide, and someone, like, there have been times when I was giving a tour and someone asked me something that I promise you I didn't have any inkling of an answer to. And I understand that can be an awkward situation, but in the book, the tour guide was getting angry and low-key combative with Sydney.
Yeah.
And it's just like, okay, pause. If someone is trying to correct you or offering new information, that's not a good look to be defensive. To
just shut them down and tell them that her facts are not important enough. Like, it just, it's so angering.
Right. And so we start off there. Enter Theo and Kim, aka Sydney's
Ponytail Lululemon.
That description, I mean, with what is that? 2 words, 3 words, perfectly sums up Kim DeVries.
Need we say more?
Yes. And their whole relationship is really fascinating to me.
Yeah, I didn't get it, I guess, like, because we get the first chapter from Theo's perspective, and he's talking about how he lives upstairs, Kim lives downstairs. I'm like, are they not a couple? Then the relationship's on the rocks, and I'm like, break up?
Yeah.
Like, it was just so strange too that they're living in this same place, but they're, like, not even acknowledging each other. And, you know, we know Theo can't leave because he has stake in this place and, like, no money to his name, and he is unemployed. So he's like, I physically cannot leave because I have nowhere else to go. Kim, because of her pride and her arrogance and her entitlement, we know she's not going to leave. So yeah, it is very interesting that they find themselves in this situation where they're, like, not together, but they're not broken up and they're living together.
Yeah, it was just, also, I'm sorry, I have to say this, and I'm gonna annoy you, Soraya, probably, because I've told you, I've brought this up to you numerous times just over the last couple of months, I guess, but that show You on Netflix, season 1, Beck. She's living in New York, I believe in a brownstone, similarly, on the, first floor. No types of blinds, no types of curtains, no nothing.
Y'all, when I say I could have a whole podcast dedicated to why I did not like the show You, I mean it.
I've got mixed feelings. I will say the second season's depiction of LA was just a treat.
Funny. That was the only good part. I was cackling because I worked in LA for quite a while and I hated it. I don't like LA is cool or whatever to pop into for the day, but working there, living there, not for me. And so, yeah, a lot of those things from that the second season of You had me cracking up because I was like, that's appropriate.
Right. I just that show is a lot, but one thing that I can't get the image out of my head. It's burned in and seared in forever. And anyone who's ever watched You, I'm gonna ask you about it because I can't stop thinking about it. And Beck, she did not have blinds, like, and she was, living her
doing the most, walking around naked, taking a little trip to Pleasure Town, windows, come on.
Yeah, broad daylight, right? And so from what I understand, that's something. So Sydney is directly across from Kim and Theo, and she calls that out. She's like, they don't have, I could see directly into their entire place.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, is that a thing? Is that real? I want to know. And I already know the answer because in college dorming, I did see this a lot, like blinds open. And I'm also just a paranoid person in general. Everyone for the most part probably knows this, but at nighttime, there's that whole, I don't know if it's an optical illusion. It's not, but
the spotlight.
Yes.
You have your lights on inside and it's dark outside, you may as well be on display at a museum because everyone and their mother's best friend can see what you are doing.
They can see you, but you can't see them. And that drives me insane. Just know. Yeah. So I can't stop thinking about that. So, but that was interesting and a cool kind of tool or device used in the story because kind of I know it's on the cover of the book, but Rear Window is referenced. And yeah, it's very interesting because you could see in, and so they're trying to learn stuff about each other, their new neighbors, and they each have their own perceptions based off of that. Sydney, from what I understand, has blinds on her windows, but she's outside on her porch a lot. So we got Theo watching her, trying to gather interest. That was a whole interesting moment to read about.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess to kind of see the preconceived notions they had about each other and then how they were correct or incorrect once they finally got to know each other. Yeah.
And them getting to know each other.
Yeah. I know you have some strong feelings about this because what we said in before we started. Mm-hmm. And I guess what I'll say is I never doubted the feelings that Theo had for Sydney. Mm-hmm. Because at first I was I don't know how to feel about him. That's why I keep wanting to call him Kelly, from such a fun age. So at first, I think we thought Kelly was going to be cool, mm-hmm. and then he was absolutely not. He was a fetishizer. And so, yes. Especially Kim being the way she is with Theo being with Kim, I was I don't know how I'm gonna feel about Theo. I do think he really likes Sydney. I didn't think he was gonna stab her in the back or anything like that. Mm-hmm. I feel Sydney, I mean, I guess it changed towards the end of the book, but I feel the only interest she had in him was mildly physical. It didn't seem like there was anything deeper than that. Mm-hmm. And then I guess what they went through brought them together. I guess I'm not mad at them ultimately getting together. And we'll talk more about Theo after you share.
Yeah, so here's the thing. There's a point in the book where I was reading, closed the book, I'd say a quarter to midway in, where I'm these two people have zero chemistry. There's absolutely no chemistry. I can't even begin to fathom an inkling of them having a successful relationship because it's very clear, and I don't know, it was hard to read some of their interactions just because I could feel Sydney's obvious and apparent discomfort. And then I could also see Theo's kind of disregard for that. And he, like you said, I don't doubt that he didn't, I could tell he liked her. He genuinely liked her. But that's not enough for a relationship, one person to like one person. We all know unrequited love exists. But I will say I did have a change of heart as we went on. And I was living for their Bonnie and Clyde moment at the end.
That was and we'll get into this, I guess, a little bit more. But my biggest beef with Theo, and I guess there was a lot of self-reflection on his part as the story went on, because I would say he was very kind of ignorant and naive when the book started about what was happening in their neighborhood. And I'm not talking about the crazy stuff, but just the gentrification aspect of it, of what this Black community was going through, with the influx of people moving into their neighborhood. Mm-hmm. He did self-reflect, but my biggest problem with him was he meant well, but meaning well isn't good enough. Mm-hmm. And so there was really no education on his part. There was I'm not racist, and here's my BLM shirt, and this should show you I'm down for the cause. But I'm but you're with someone like Kim,
right?
You can't excuse her behavior. And there's even a part when he after the town hall meeting, or he comes home and Josie, Kim, and I can't remember Josie's husband Terry.
Yeah,
they're getting all paranoid and accusing the neighborhood of conspiring against them.
Mm-hmm.
And Kim says something like, there's just so few of us here, meaning white people. And Kelly, see, there I go. Theo in his head was like, oh, well, she's not like that, like meaning racist.
Mm-hmm.
He was like, oh, well, she's not that. And I think he even mentions like the Michelle Obama poster or something in that part.
Yeah.
And I'm like, say the word racist. It's not a bad word. If someone is racist, they are racist. So for him to even in his head be like, well, she's not that. Like, I know she has an attitude problem sometimes. And I'm like, she is racist. Yeah. And say it. You know, like the fact that he could even say it in his head was like, okay. And I honestly can't remember if this was a part in the book where they mentioned the Michelle Obama thing. So if it's not, like, I apologize. But even so, that doesn't mean she's not racist.
Right.
And it brings me back to my whole point. We've talked about this before. It really bothers me, people who are willing to suspend their racism, or I wouldn't even say suspend it, but maybe overlook it for, quote, like special cases, what they deem special cases, when a Black person has proven themselves like worthy in their eyes, if that makes sense. Like, you know, if someone is an amazing athlete or an incredible politician or spokesperson, or just, you know, when they're like, oh, well, you know, Michelle Obama is different, or like so-and-so is different than other Black people. Like, that's that backhanded compliment that racist people try to use. And, you know, I had wanted to mention this at a point, and maybe I don't know if it's the best part to mention it here, but that's something that really bothers me. And what we've seen with BLM and Black athletes. So people getting upset with Black athletes for speaking up on BLM issues and for kneeling during the national anthem and being like, well, that's not what their job is. And they're athletes. They should stick to what they know, as if being Black is not a part of their everyday life. Right. And it's like, how funny that you don't mind Black people when you're profiting off of them, when, you know, they're bringing you your entertainment and your sports. Suddenly, oh, it's fine. But then the second they like remind you that they are a Black person fighting for equality, then you have a problem.
Right. I literally, that whole entire statement, I couldn't have said that better. It's so interesting to me too how BLM has become this, I don't know,
like
it's
political.
Yeah. Thing. And like, let's break this down. BLM, Black Lives Matter, a statement. It's just a statement, right? So why is that offensive? And like you said, with Black athletes and celebrities, politicians, like, unfortunately, our existence is often politicized. We are dealing with systemic racism in this country. Let's not forget about 400 years ago, what was going on. And so, like, unfortunately, we can't just separate it. It's not just a separate thing. Like, my Blackness follows me everywhere. It follows me everywhere. At a job interview, my Blackness is there. At the gas station pump, guess what? My Blackness is there. When I'm thinking about what I'm cooking for dinner, walking through Target, guess what? My Blackness is there.
And we should not have to prove ourselves, I'm putting quotes around, to be taken seriously,
right?
Or to feel like, oh, okay, well, like, they're different. So because, you know, they're incredibly intelligent or they have this incredible gift. Like, do non-people of color have to walk around proving themselves?
Exactly. And I think that's a terrible misconception that, unfortunately, and honestly, I think I've been there when I was probably in middle school. As Black people, we've internalized this idea that if we present a certain way, we can kind of curb off some of that racism. But the fact of the matter is, no, you can't, unfortunately.
And I feel like that's a defense mechanism.
It is. Yeah, definitely. And last night I was actually listening to Black Chick Lit podcast, and they were interviewing the author Alyssa Cole, and they had this fascinating moment, and I want to get your opinion on it because I literally never thought of this like this ever in my whole life. And so this was like breakthrough moment for me. But they were talking about microaggressions, and Alyssa Cole was talking about, I believe it was when she was living in New York. She was dealing with something I've dealt with way more times than I care to even count, which is when you're passing a white woman and they move their purse to the other side, kind of like insinuating that you're just going to wildly break out and steal. And yeah. So that happened to her. And she started to reflect on what was I wearing at the time. And she was talking about how her fashion has kind of changed. At the time, she was into like leather jackets and stuff. But then she thought, like, it happened to her one time and she was wearing heels, and I think a dress, but she was wearing heels. And she's like, she knows good and well, I can't, like, it's impractical to steal while you're wearing heels. But then she said this, which is really fascinating. It wasn't about whether or not she was an actual threat. It was a power move. it was saying, and then the host kind of expounded upon that. It was saying, let me take her down to her level. She's wearing a dress, she's wearing heels, she's feeling herself, she thinks she looks good. Let me remind her with this subtle act of racism, this microaggression, where her place is.
That is so interesting. And it reminds me of that moment in the book where after the bodega is taken over by whatever, Tony, whoever his name is, when Sydney goes to pay, she goes there to get, I can't remember what they went for, soda? A drink or something.
And she gets the kombucha.
Yeah, he assumes she's looking for alcohol, or maybe she was going for wine. I cannot remember.
Oh, yeah.
And it ends up being kombucha in that section. He's like, oh, we don't sell 40s. Issue 1. Then she gets to the counter to pay for her kombucha, and he's like, oh, this isn't covered by WIC. Jaw drop again. Issue number 2. And so then she's like, not that there's anything wrong with either of those things, is exactly what she says, but why are you making assumptions about my financial status or my drinking habits? And so then she pays with a 20. He said he makes this big show of like checking if it's counterfeit, and then he refuses to give her change. Like her total came out to $5, and he gives her a 5 back. And she basically is like, I paid you with a 20. You made a huge show of making sure it wasn't real. Like, where's my $10? I should be getting 15 back. And he was like, basically he says to her, like, well, who's going to believe you? If a cop shows up here and it's your word against mine, who's going to believe that you actually gave me a 20? And it's a power move. Exactly like what you were saying in that moment, because what is she supposed to do? She knows that he's right. He's a white man. They're going to most likely believe him. And even if they didn't, like, she doesn't want the cops coming there and turning it into this big thing. And so it's just, when you said the phrase power move, that's exactly the scene in the book that it made me think of, because that's precisely what he was doing, is making his presence known and showing her exactly the place, quote, that he believed she should be.
Right. And it's just, it's baffling to me because, like, in my own experiences, I haven't experienced that. That scene was, I forgot about that one, actually. But it's just, like, it always happens when I'm quite literally just minding my business. And in real life, like, I am dramatic when I'm talking to friends and family, but I'm, like, low-key an introvert. Like, I don't like unnecessary attention. It frightens me, quite frankly.
I'm right there with you. Like, don't look at me, don't talk to me.
Yeah, I don't, no. Don't draw attention to me. Like, I'm trying to just be in and out, right? So, like, when these things happen, like, I've had people, white people typically, or non-Black people, cross the street when I'm walking or lock their car doors. I used to be a custodian at a predominantly white, wealthy country club, and I'll never forget this. I was walking down the stairs, and this woman was walking up the stairs, and I was carrying my supplies. So I'm wearing gloves. I had a bucket with my squeegee, and, like, I have my equipment because I'm at work. And she sees me, and she moves her purse to her other side. And I'm not a morning person. That shift was a sunrise shift. I got in at 4 or 5 a.m. I was, like, approaching the end of the shift, and I just let out a cackle, just a frustration. I looked at her like, are you for real right now? What? You look at the emblem on my shirt.
You think I'm in uniform with my equipment going to snatch your purse in this stairwell and run away? Like, seriously.
Like, to do what? To do what? And I just, and again, it's this idea of a power move. And I think that's so interesting because it's true. I don't think she really thought I was a threat. I think she did that in that moment to remind me, like, hey, like, you work for me in this moment, like, and it's just like, that sucks, dude. That really sucks. Cause like I was minding my business. I was like, okay, I'm getting off of work. What am I going to do today? And this is pre-COVID. This is years ago. So I'm like, let me see if my friend's busy or not. We can hang out, Like, that's where my mind was. I'm not worried about your freaking purse, dude. And so for her to do that, I was just like, wow, okay. Like, it's always like that too. Like, and very quickly, instantly, I'm reminded of, I don't have the luxury to forget.
But it's like you slip into, sometimes I feel like you slip into like a
comfort.
It's like a comfort, or you're not as blatantly aware of it, I'm sure, as you were after that happened. But, you fall into like, okay, I'm not thinking about that right now.
Just living.
And so I can't, like, that's just so jarring to then be like, oh, no, this is still something that follows me everywhere, and this is what people think about me, regardless of how I present myself, regardless of how well I speak, regardless of how polite I am. It doesn't matter.
Exactly.
It doesn't matter.
And, there's also kind of similarly in the book that moment when Sydney, this is before Sydney and Theo become friends and stuff, but they're in the store, Theo and Kim, and Kim, I think she cuts Sydney and they get into like an argument, but Sydney, like she doesn't really care. Like she's trying to leave.
Yeah.
And Kim starts getting hysterical. And in that same argument, she threatens to call the police.
Yes. And not Kelly. Goodness, Theo. Theo even talks about like the smug smile that she gets on her face when she says that. Like she just like, you know, played her trump card or whatever, however the phrase goes. Because she knew, what is Sydney going to say in that moment?
Right.
Because she knows, as a white woman, again, if the cops show up, it's over for Sydney.
Right. And we saw this literally happen, though. This is what I was saying at the top of the episode about, like, yes, this is fiction, this is a thriller, but there's so many parallels that, you know, this book is, honestly, it's an educational tool, even more so than just being, you know, reading. Because, like, with the Amy Cooper situation and the bird watching situation with the man in the park, and Amy Cooper was not following the rules, so he reminded her of the rules, and she said, I'm going to call the cops on you. And so in that moment, and this was, like, also... I mean, the entire nation was protesting police brutality. Like, she literally was trying to weaponize her whiteness in the sense that she knew that if I call the police, there's a chance they could even pull out their gun and intimidate this black man. For what? Because she didn't have her dog on a leash? You know, it's like, where do you get this sense of entitlement that you can do whatever you want? And I think she even said... when she was apologizing, because there's always the apology video, I view the police as my personal protection system. And I'm like, wow.
Must be nice.
That must be nice, because when I'm driving on the freeway, not doing anything wrong, I'm on alert. As a black person, like, and that's something just in my life, I've spoken to black friends and family, like, I don't have that same experience.
If you're not part of a marginalized group, you don't understand what that feels like. To know that this system that is supposed to be set up to protect and serve doesn't, you know what I'm saying? Or it only does for a specific group of people. And so there's that part where Theo, when they're first breaking into the hospital after like they cause the blackout, so it's Sydney and Theo, they're going in through the like, the bodega doors that lead to like the storage, whatever, I can't remember. But yeah, so they're going through, and Theo thinks something in his head of like, so this is what it feels like to know I can't call the police, or something along those lines. And so that's what I'm talking about, is like this journey that Theo kind of goes on throughout the book of, because like I said before, he was very kind of naive at the beginning, and he really starts to have a better understanding of what's going on, of what the community is going through. Because I don't even want to say what they're feeling, because he's like never going to know what they're feeling firsthand. But just that statement, it really showed how much he had learned and realized of knowing like the cops are not going to be on their side in this situation, because they were a part of the problem. It was a police officer who showed up in Sydney's house and tried to kill her for this Varentech deal. So yeah, Alyssa
Cole does not miss, like,
she does not miss
the nuance, the details, like when he said that. And that's an interesting point you bring up with Theo, because yes, he's well-meaning, and, you know, yes, he clearly wants to learn. Like, he goes to the meetings, he wants to be a part of the block party, he wants to help Sydney, he interacts with his neighbors, he's not always afraid. I think you were saying this before we started recording, but, like, Kim's little comments about the neighbors, like, like, you chose to move here. You're wealthy.
Made you. Yes, you could have picked anywhere in this country, in the world, probably to live. You chose to come to this particular community, and then you have the audacity to complain that it's not how you want it.
And I think there's one part where there's like some black children, and they're getting ready to hang out, and I'm pretty sure that's when she was complaining about the loudness. But then you could just see the parallels, because Theo knew their names. Like, I think one kid's name was Preston or something.
Oh yeah.
So he's making an effort, but then, and like you said, by being in a relationship with Kim, by moving in with her, you're enabling this behavior.
Yes, you're passively accepting it.
Right.
Like, especially because even on the tour, when Sydney was bringing up like, oh, these are other facts that you're not, including in this tour, Theo did try to like say something to encourage her to keep speaking, but then the tour guide shut it down, and then even Kim was like, stop interrupting the tour, Theo, and Theo didn't say anything after that.
Right.
So like, you're complicit.
Right. And there's also some own, like, so he's trying, that we can see, but I think internally, so he comes from a, I guess, kind of lower income background. His mom was in and out of a lot of abusive relationships that definitely had an impact on him. His dad was involved in some just some shady dealings, I guess you could say. He kind of went into business as he got older with his dad, was dealing with shady stuff. And so yes, he comes from I guess like a struggling working class background, and that definitely kind of colors his opinion and perspective. But he's still a white man in America.
I'm so glad you said that. I have my book open to a page and a quote. I was reading my notes and I was like, I wanted to touch on this. I feel like she did such an amazing job. So I feel like, people always say this, but especially with what happened this summer with, the wave of BLM protests and things like that. A lot of people, when you try to bring up the concept of white privilege, people get defensive because like, well, I'm not wealthy, so I'm not benefiting from this privilege just because I'm white. And it's like, but you are.
Yeah.
And so I feel like Alyssa Cole did an amazing job of integrating that into the story, because I could tell that, and I wrote this down, that with Theo, the book touches on the idea of being poor and how that does not eliminate your white privilege, because he's always looking at Kim through the lens of everything that's available to her because she has money. But that scene when they go to the church, Theo and Sydney, was the first time he realized things that are available to him. And so he even says, I'd only thought about how safe, or he said, in all the times I've moved in New York, I'd only thought about how safe the area was for me, not what my presence meant for people in the neighborhood, not about what advantages I had that they didn't. I was poor too, after all, even though I had figured out how not to be for a little while at least. So, like, he's talking about, like, even just being white affords him certain luxuries. When the cops are out there patrolling the neighborhoods, like they start doing towards the end of the book, they're not harassing him. Even when things pop off with the blackout, he knows, he even has a thought of, I could walk away right now and the cops would think I'm a part of this and would leave me alone while they're out here killing the people in this community. And so I just think that was a really great way to highlight that, because it's not about, like, white privilege doesn't mean wealth, it means opportunity.
Right.
Even if you are poor and white, you still have certain opportunities available to you that Black people of color in this country simply do not.
Right. And I think, we're born, right? Like, you don't have any say in how you appear, but you do have to acknowledge what that means in this country. And so, like, even just the fact that his whole job situation, how he lied his way to the top and then got caught, but he was like, I was still able to do that. And, like, he's relatively fine. He didn't go to jail.
I was going to say, people of color have gone to jail for less. He should have been in jail for that. Yeah. But no, all they did was blacklist him in that company, and he just can't work there anymore.
So he married rich and move on.
Yeah, like, that's what I'm saying. It's like, he's still, even the consequences, like, you have people, innocent people, sitting in jail right now when he committed actual, I can't even remember, I'm pretty sure it was a felony.
Yeah, like a series of white collar crimes.
Yeah, and scot-free.
And he was stealing. I just remember that. Yeah, he was, yes. So, yeah, Theo was really just a carefully written, crafted character that I think there's so many learning points. But with Theo, I definitely had beef with, it kept coming up, and, like, I was like, okay, I'm not going to talk about it, but he kept saying it, and he's like, well, Sydney has this lovely brownstone and the community garden that she got from her mom. Like, she has a garden in the house. She has a garden in the house. I'm like, Theo, you guys are not on the same playing field. Yeah. You are not, okay? And little does he know, which he doesn't because he's over there assuming, watching through his windows with no blinds, so she's actually going through a lot. She's struggling to keep the house afloat because, as we find out, her mom passed away. She physically buried her mom herself, as Sarai was saying. And so, like, he doesn't know that. Like, every day she's getting bills in the mail that she's like, I don't know how I'm going to pay all this. She's avoiding bill collectors on the phone. He doesn't know. He just sees something, assumes, and thinks he can say that. And even if she did, she's still a Black woman. She's still going to get microaggressions from your girlfriend or ex-girlfriend, Kim. She's still going to be dealing with police harassment. Like, she's still a woman. Yep. So the Uber situation, terrifying, absolutely terrifying. And so I'm like, Theo, just can it. Please open up a book.
And there's so many little things that Alyssa Cole put in here that I just wanted to talk about, because I just feel like I was reading certain parts and I was like, just wow. So there's a part where Sydney is in her backyard and Josie, one of the people who are part of this whole gentrification, I don't even know what to call it. We're gonna call it mass murder, because that's basically what's happening. Is these people are coming in and stealing the Black people from the neighborhood and using them for research and killing them. And so Josie, who is a part of this, is gardening. She's with her son, and her son doesn't know what fertilizer is. And so she's like, do you know what it is? And he's like, no. And she's like, it's shit, sweetie. Sorry, I know we don't usually curse, but this is what the book says, y'all. And so it says Josie laughs and says, sometimes you have soil that isn't good for growing things in anymore. It needs to become fertile again. So you cover it with the shit and then you wait. You let the shit do the work, then you come in and plant your crops. My grandfather taught me that, and his grandfather taught him that. When I read that, because, it's a metaphor for exactly what they're doing to this neighborhood. Mm-hmm. They have decided that the soil, this neighborhood, isn't good anymore because it's like a flourishing Black community. And she said, you cover it with the shit and then you wait. This was exactly what they're going to do. Mm-hmm. They're coming in, they're stealing these people from their homes in the dead of night. They are completely disrupting this community so that they can then come in and plant their crops. Mm-hmm. So I just thought the way she worded that and that whole little scene was chilling.
Yeah. And I think it's also kind of reiterated. I forget if it's Paulette or Pauline, but Miss Candace looks over a group of elderly Black citizens, and someone says at that part in the book, all they do is break. They break and then they build. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like that's the same thing. Like, or they assume something is broken so that they can build. And it's like, who are you to even say that? Yeah. Like, and she's teaching her kid this. Yes. He's like 4 or 5.
Yes, and there was another part too. So the family that took Mr. Perkins' house, when they're moving in, Theo and Sydney are out there talking to them, and the wife, I don't know her name, of this new couple, she's like, Charlie, go make sure the movers don't break that. It's been in my family for years, and he just dropped it without a second thought. And it says she glances at Charlie and his wife as they stand next to a giant carved wood African statue that the movers are about to take upstairs. And that's what she was talking about, them breaking. And I feel like that was a callback to slavery, to mm-hmm. when, white families owned Black slaves and they passed them down for generations and generations. And so for her saying like, oh, treat this thing with care because it belongs to me. And then, of course, it happens to be an African wood statue. Like, I just feel like that's the parallel that Cindy was making there. Mm-hmm. Like, her complete disregard for everyone in this neighborhood, but she cares about this because she has ownership of this. Yeah. Does that make sense what I'm trying to say?
Yes, absolutely. Viewing Black people as capital, as something I can own. And, like, we're not your property. Yeah. That's so weird. Like, yes. I feel like in like 2 seconds of speaking, I took out the meaning from what you were saying, but
no, yeah. I know. It was just that scene to me. It just straight up reminded me of slave ownership. I'm just saying, be careful with that. It's been in my family for years.
Yeah. Kind of switching gears a little bit, something I wanted to bring up with, is so you're kind of touching on this in the beginning. So it's pretty clear Sydney is dealing with anxiety as things are changing, as she's very isolated and alone. But it's also in the beginning, I forget exactly which part, but we find out that she has depression. I think that definitely speaks to a lot of her actions, because at times, especially in her interactions with Theo, I was like, okay, it's very clear you don't like him. Like, why are you even entertaining him? Just call it off. Say, I don't need a research assistant. And I will say, I think there's a certain part in the book where, since they were both by themselves, they were pretty much perfect for each other. Like, I felt like they both needed each other, mm-hmm. and they were open to it. And so I can understand the relationship working later on. So there's a part in the book where Miss Candace gives her a plate of food, and it keeps coming up again and again. All the other characters comment on how tired Sydney looks and how she looks like she's like maybe not taking care of herself, kind of going through it. And I think that was so it spoke to like that family aspect of their community, mm-hmm. because like, and Sydney, of course, she's like, no, it's okay. Like, I have leftovers. I don't need it. And she's like, take it. Like, I have plenty of food. And Sydney's talking about how good the food smells and it's fresh and it's this plate just waiting for her. And I was like, that's so interesting, because I think a lot of times when loved ones or people in their lives with depression, and I can attest to this, like, they, meaning well, will do something like, how are you feeling? How are you doing? And like, while again, that's well-intentioned, sometimes like when you have depression, you're not going to just be like, here's everything I'm going through. Sometimes it's hard to communicate that. But in that moment, Miss Candace was like, well, I can be present in another way. Like I can see visibly she's tired. Like I haven't seen her in a while. Let me get dinner. Let me clear dinner off her plate. She doesn't have to worry about dinner. And I almost said Kelly. Theo also does this later in the book where I think this is when things start to pick up, but he goes and he gets breakfast and it's like some pastries or something. And it's just like, again, like okay, here's breakfast. And it doesn't always have to be food, but it's just like being present in other ways.
Yeah, a way of showing I'm thinking about you. They're checking on you and they're trying to make sure you're okay.
It doesn't always have to be like food or items or something, spending money, but it's just like, I care about this person. I love this person. What can I do to make their life easier?
Yeah.
And that's, I don't know. I really like that. I like that both Miss Candace and Theo did that.
I wanted to ask you, something I was a little unclear on. So did Drea really betray her or no?
Oh, okay. See, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I feel like she did.
Okay.
Because I only say that because of the whole receipt thing. I don't know if it was planted, though.
Yeah, that's what I was like. Was it planted, or did Drea not know that this company was going to rip her off? Like, I was confused. So I wanted to get your feedback.
I feel like Drea got played and then murdered. And I think she really did love Sydney and Sydney's mom, but I think much like Sydney's mom got kind of sold this false dream with the house and got stuck in this real estate battle, Drea did. But I'm just kind of like, Drea, how could you do that though?
Yeah.
I think it was $50,000 she got for recruiting Sydney's mom to sell her house. And I'm like, oh gosh.
Yeah, I'm like, did she not know the fine print that it was going to end up being like this terrible deal and that Sydney's mom was going to lose absolutely everything. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, if she did, I now understand. I mean, they were friends, so there's like a loyalty and a compassion there. Mm-hmm. But now I like really understand the way she was trying to help Sydney so much through everything, probably because there's an immense amount of guilt.
Right. Oh, that's a good point. That's true. Yeah, we were talking about this off air, but so there's a part in the book around the middle where Sydney can't reach Drea. And again, like Drea has been someone in Sydney's life where she can really kind of lean on as she's dealing with depression and I'm assuming anxiety as well. But Drea has communicated like, I can't take everything on. Maybe you should seek out therapy and talk to someone. And Sydney has her apprehensions because of what happened in her previous marriage where she was forced to be in that institution and everything that happened with that. And so I was kind of frustrated with Drea until we found out why she wasn't responding. Because I think, while it's important to set those boundaries, she would kind of fall back on it. So like, she would be like, okay, yeah, like, please don't pour all this on me. I'm at work right now. But then they would hang out and she would like talk to her, or she would like, when they were dealing with Theo, have her back. And they're friends and I get it. But I think it's very important that like clear boundaries are set.
And that's another thing too. So when we say like Alyssa Cole took on so many things in this book and like just portrayed them in such a real way. And so particularly there was a part, because we know, like we said, that Sydney is dealing with anxiety, and that moment where she thinks like Drea is ignoring her because like Sydney's become too much for her. Mm-hmm. Anybody who's ever dealt with anxiety knows that feeling. Mm-hmm. Especially when you have one person who you tend to lean on or come to, you always have this fear of like, one day it's going to be too much for them, or they're going to be tired of me, or they're not going to deal with me anymore. So like that whole scene where she's like, I finally crossed the line and Drea's done with me and she hates me. And like when she saw she was typing and then a message never came, like building up that anxiety there, it was so realistic and believable. And I feel like so many of us have felt that way before.
Right. Like she doesn't miss, guys. Alyssa Cole does not miss. So kind of moving into the ending, there was a part when, the police have arrived. It's supposed to be the block party, and they're literally just like attacking the entire neighborhood. Meanwhile, we know Kim and friends and father are at the abandoned hospital doing literal human experimentation, and that's where Theo and Sydney go to. And so when they're there, it's revealed Kavan, he was somebody who lived in the community that Sydney knows, and he had a little appearance, I think about midway in the book, where like Theo runs into him and he's walking late at night one night, and like he's disoriented. It seems like he's on drugs, and Theo's kind of spooked. He has an interaction with a cop. So flash forward to the ending, and they realize what's happening and that he was tested on. Kavan is crying out to his mom. And I couldn't help but, like, I got literal chills because of what happened with George Floyd. And, like, again, the amount of references that, so yes, you know, I keep saying this, but it's like, this is real life, guys. Like, yes, things are more theatrical here, but if anyone's crying to their mom, like, or calling, sorry, if anyone's calling out to their mom, then yeah, it just, it's hard to speak on.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I went and looked when, because this book came out in September, I think. I couldn't remember. Either way, whether it was coincidental or purposeful, that's immediately what I thought of when I read it too. And it was heartbreaking.
Right.
Heartbreaking, especially because, and Theo, in that scene, he ends up like steering the cops to where Kavan had went, so we know that he's dead. And yeah, that was just, it was very difficult to read.
Right. And I guess just kind of further unpacking that ending, because I mean, there's a lot going on there. Like, so they're experimenting on the Black people in the neighborhood. I forget, it's like not farm. Do you remember the name of the corporation by any chance?
Barentech?
Yes. I think.
Yeah.
Yes. So, to be honest, I want to ask you a little bit, because I got kind of confused, because I know it was kind of a commentary on the drug crisis and how they're kind of using that to push out Black people. And so from what I understand, they were injecting the Black people in the neighborhood with experimental drugs.
Yeah, so it seemed like they were using it as like a cycle. And I think they mentioned it when they were in that shareholder meeting of like they're getting money for research to help with the opioid crisis, but then also creating opioids. So it's like they're perpetuating the problem, but then also being paid by the government, I believe, to find a solution to the problem.
Guys, okay, so as I was reading this book, literally I got a notification on my phone, a news article. There's a company called Purdue Pharma. They're the creators of OxyContin, and the drug oxycodone. And they pled guilty to 3 federal charges, basically from 1999 to 2018, in a population of 450,000 people. A third of those deaths were from prescription opioids. And it was proven that they were paying doctors to write more opioid prescriptions.
This is something I feel incredibly passionate about, because it's so funny, because I know when we first started talking about this, you were talking about how your short film, right, was on gentrification? Yes. And when I was a senior in high school, we had to write a research paper every year, but the research paper I was far and away most proud of was the one I did for my senior year. And it was an entire paper and presentation on over-medication in America. And it is a rampant problem. I mean, I was in high school or senior in 2014. The problem, it's only gotten worse. And that was a part of what I found in my research is like doctors are so quick to write pain medications. They don't really do further testing to try to figure out the root of the problem. All you have to do is basically go in and say you're in pain and they will write it for you. There's something called doctor shopping, where people will go to multiple doctors for the same prescription, and that's how they get it. Wow. And doctors have started writing these prescriptions for children. I remember I had a tooth surgery when I was in middle school. I broke my tooth, that was the whole thing. But anyway, after this procedure, they prescribed me Vicodin. I was 13 years old. And my mom was like, this is unnecessary. Like, I don't even think we filled it. And I wasn't even in that bad of pain. I think I took 2 Advil and called it good. Like, it's just insane, this crisis. And so, yeah, it's just something I feel very, very strongly about. Yes.
And so, like, it feels real. And I think that's where the horror comes in. Like, so much of it feels like it could actually happen. And even this whole idea of human experimentation, we've actually seen that with the Agent Orange situation in Vietnam and the Tuskegee experiment. So I couldn't remember, like, as I was reading that part, I was like trying to remember what happened. And so I did some research, and it's actually on the CDC's website right now. We can even leave the link in our show notes. But in a nutshell, for those who don't know, in 1932, the U.S. Public Health Service treated 600 Black men for bad blood, which is basically an umbrella term at the time that included anemia, syphilis, fatigue in Macon County, Alabama. But the thing is, there was no clear informed consent. So 399 men actually had syphilis, 201 men did not. But the thing is, through that entire period, it was supposed to be a 6-month study. It went on for 40 years, 4 decades. Started in 1932, it ended in the 70s. My parents were babies in the 70s. They were alive. This is current history, modern history, guys. So long story short, it was proven around this time, I believe it was like around the 50s, that penicillin was effective in treating syphilis. Not once were any of those men given penicillin. Literally, they were just lab rats. They were injected, pumped with random stuff. And this is a quote. We can also link this article in the description as well. But basically, I'm just going to read it word for word. They also believe that all Black people, regardless of their education, background, economic, or personal situations, could not be convinced to get treatment for syphilis. Thus, the USPHS could justify the Tuskegee study, calling it a study in nature rather than an experiment, meant to simply observe the natural progression of syphilis within a community that wouldn't seek treatment. So for 40 years, they injected 600 Black men, tested them. They also included their wives and children just as a what-ifs experiment, just to see, like, okay, so let's also unpack that. So their whole premise is that Black people essentially didn't want to go to the doctor. Why is that, I wonder? Mm-hmm. And so this went on for 4 decades. And in the 70s, they went about their reparations. So the reparations included free medical exams, free meals, burial insurance, and settlement payments. But that doesn't change the fact that they saw human beings and thought, I can test on them just because I can.
Yeah, because their lives mean so little that I can treat them the way I would treat an animal in a facility.
Right. And even now we have places in law that you can't do that to animals, you know? And so, the whole ending, the way that played out, like, yes, it was. And it also kind of was, I think you've seen it before. I think we talked about it, the movie The Hunt.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in the end of the movie The Hunt, there's a similar scene where it's like they're in that, like, I forget, like conference room, and like all the big heads are talking. It's very similar to this ending, but I'm just like, the whole situation's not that far-fetched. This was the 70s when they stopped experimenting on human beings.
And I feel like that is something that is, when people try to discredit the things that have happened to Black people in this country, that's the first thing that people will say. It was so long ago. It was so long ago. It really wasn't. Even slavery, it was not. When you think about time in relation to just think about time as a whole, like for how long humans have been on this earth, right? If you think back to slavery, it just truly was not that long ago. So it's like, stop trying to belittle it, stop trying to discredit it by saying, well, oh, that was just so long ago, it doesn't matter now, things are different. It really wasn't. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Like, our parents were alive in the 70s. It's just,
and there's a such thing as, generational trauma. So it's like, there's always a cause and an effect, right? So there's the cause, there's the inciting incident, this event, like, there's still an effect, and it's still an effect. Like, as we've been discussing, as this summer, and just Black existence in America with microaggressions and aggressions, it's a complete misconception. And honestly, it's insulting. It's insulting to say that. It's gaslighting to say that. And something just kind of on the topic, if you're curious, I'd recommend Googling the term scientific racism. There's a lot of interesting stuff on that that's directly relevant. And so, like, again, like, while it was kind of, it was just hard to read. Like, they're literally, and then there's that whole moment, like you mentioned earlier, where Kelly's like, we can't call the police. Like, it's them, their guns, and their lives on the line.
And they're even laughing about it when they get into the conference, or when they hear them in the conference room, and even their private group chat. But they're just saying things like, oh, well, is this going to be too big of a scene? Maybe we should ease into it. And like, doesn't matter. There's always something going on during Labor Day weekend. We control the media. We control the police. So if we have to edit the situation or like spin it in our favor, it's not a big deal. And they even say something like, no one's worried about the people in this neighborhood anyway.
Oh gosh, yeah. She doesn't miss, guys. Like there's so much details. Something else that's really interesting in this part is that so there's a little moment where, you know, of course they're in the conference room, everyone's alerted that they found them in this abandoned hospital, and Theo is like co-conspiracying in essence and on Sydney's team. So they get caught and they're like, test him too. And they're like, well, he's not black. And they're like, and it's literally like, this is in the history. This is real. Like, this is in the history books. If you were a sympathizer with enslaved people, then you were on that team. You're getting the same treatment.
Mm-hmm. There was no way to win because we ourselves couldn't, and the people trying to support us couldn't either.
Exactly.
You know, it just, and I know we're getting to we're over an hour here, so I know we'll probably be closing out soon, but there were just two things that I wanted to reference before we did, because I just thought like there are things that stuck out to me. So the first one was when Josie, Terry, and their kid and their dog move in, and they're having friends over, and I think Sydney's sitting on her front porch, and one of the friends comments on how nice their house looks now. And Josie's like, the houses look nice in spite of the neglect. No amount of ugly Home Depot plants can hide this neglect either. And Sydney's like getting irritated in her head. And Josie's like, all I'm saying is that I can trace my ancestors back to New Amsterdam. I appreciate history. I had to write that down because I'm sorry, we just don't have that luxury.
Mm-hmm.
Seeing as how we were stolen from a completely separate continent and brought over here to be enslaved, yeah, a lot of Black people don't get to appreciate history in the same way because we were robbed of our history.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, how could you just overlook that and be like, well, I can trace my ancestors and I have an appreciation. We don't get to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I have people in my family who are like working tirelessly to try to figure out what our history is. Mm-hmm. Because it's not easy. It's not traceable. And so that line just incredibly enraged me.
I'm really glad you brought that up because I honestly, like, there were times when I was reading this book where I said earlier I had to close it and walk away. And I think I forgot that whole period. But like, and the thing is, like, I know that, yes, again, this is fiction, but I know for a fact that there are people who feel that way. And it's just a complete slap in the face because like Soraya and I have talked about this off air before, but it's just like a lot of times people ask me, why is your name India? And to be honest, I couldn't really tell you. I don't know that my parents could tell you. They're interesting people. But one thing that my dad did say is our last name is Smith. And so that's literally one of the most common last names in America. And so he was like, I was just trying to find a way to kind of distinguish you guys a little bit. And so lo and behold, it became India Smith. Yeah. So there's this rapper I listened to named Joey Badass. And a couple years ago, he had an album that came out. And in one of the songs, he was talking about how, like, as Black Americans, we still don't know our real last names. And I just thought about that. I'm like, Smith is not... If, you know, genetically I'm from Africa originally, my whole family is, Smith it's an English name.
Right.
It's not an African name by nature. And so I'm like, wow.
Yeah, I feel like that's something people don't even take a second to think about. We don't get to know our history in the same way our, you know, non-Black counterparts do. And that's something really interesting. And I just want to touch on this because someone asked me about this and I mentioned it, and I'm really realizing this to be true. So I don't know if you watched Hamilton yet.
I still haven't seen it. I'm gonna watch it. I'll watch it today.
India,
or this weekend.
We're gonna make sure she watches it, guys, because it's so good. But I mean, obviously, like, everyone has seen Hamilton pretty much. We all know that it's a full cast of color portraying, you know, our founding fathers and major historical figures. And what I realize is part of why I love Hamilton so much, aside from it being a brilliant play, brilliant musical. So I've always thought history was very interesting. When it comes to like favorite subject in schools, I loved history. I thought it was interesting. I was really corny when someone asked me in high school why I liked it so much. I was like, it's a story that never ends. Cheesy as hell, I know. But yes, but I feel like Hamilton, okay, I don't see myself reflected in the history that we are taught in school. Like, you know, I just don't. There's no one that looks like me. We don't get to know our history. And what I love so much about Hamilton is, although I know these are not what this is not what George Washington looked like. This is not what Alexander Hamilton looked like, or Thomas Jefferson. Seeing people of color portray them has like given me a new connection to these figures, because now for the first time ever, I'm seeing people who look like me talking about the history of this country that I live in. Because like I am an American person, you know, I was born in America and an American citizen. So like American history is, I guess, part of my history. Mm-hmm. And I hope this is coming off right, but it's basically just giving me like this new attachment, because when I think about these historical figures now, you know, I think of George Washington and I'm thinking of Christopher Jackson, or Alexander Hamilton, I see Lin-Manuel Miranda, or Aaron Burr, I see Leslie Odom Jr. It's people who look like me. And so I don't know, it's kind of like reinvigorated this interest in history and just made me feel like I can finally see myself in it, however false, you know, that may be. So just speaking on like us being robbed of our history, it made me think of Hamilton, and like me realizing that's part of why I've been enjoying it so much.
I was just going to say, so I have to braid my hair this weekend. I will be tuning in to Hamilton via Disney Plus. Mark my words. This is the proof in the pudding.
Okay, we're gonna hold her to that.
But yeah, just really quickly, like you were saying, in high school and in elementary school, me going to a predominantly white school, it was always an issue when it was like, okay, time to talk about Black people and their trauma, focusing on their trauma.
Honestly.
And I was just like, first, like, ouch, like. Because, you know, it was also a bit jarring because I had, like, I mentioned earlier in the episode, my Uncle Dad, he was kind of like the family historian. And I was learning a lot about my family, even my Nana. Like, my Nana's super dope, guys. She's so cool. Like, if I could have an ounce of her coolness, I'll be happy. But, like, she would tell me about the cool stuff she was doing in LA when she was in her 20s. And I'm like, and that's just like, you know, not that long ago. But even further in our history, I'm just like, what was like a working class Black family? What was their day in the life in 1957?
Yeah.
Like, don't talk to me about segregation. Like, I just want to know, like, what games did they play? Did they play Monopoly? Like, what were they doing?
And we don't get these stories.
Yes, we're robbed of that. And so in school, you know, being in a predominantly white school, the teachers would make a scene of, like, pulling me and anyone else who was Black in the class aside, being like, are you okay with this?
Oh,
and like,
my gosh. Yes, I've had several. We were talking once about how, like, the differences between, like, discipline and, like, Black families or white families, and, like, the teacher was asking, it was just a general discourse on like, what has been your experience? Mm-hmm. And my teacher paused, asked me and the only other Black person in the class, are you guys okay if we talk about this?
Ew, what? Like, what is that, guys? What? Yeah. Mind you, I was just teeming with anxiety. So this is the last thing I want. I mentioned this before, like, attention. Like, okay, great. So a class of 40s now staring daggers at me. One teacher who was like, she was on the cooler side. She had the decency to at least pull us outside of the class and have this discussion. Of course, everyone was staring daggers as we walked back in. But nevertheless, like, you know, it was all this focus on our trauma, and that's really commendable with Hamilton. Like, I've definitely heard about it. While I have been in a cave, in a bubble, like, I still, you know, I see Twitter and stuff. I see the memes and Instagram. So that is definitely commendable. And it's just like, that's not really asking a lot. Because like you said, like, you know, whether like the fact is, born in America, I'm an American citizen. It's our history as well. And we have a right to know. And it sucks that we're robbed of that.
Yeah, totally and completely. So,
yeah.
And then I guess the last thing I wanted to say is, you hear a lot of the new people who are coming into this neighborhood, the gentrifiers. Is that a word? I'm gonna call it.
It's a word now.
Yeah, it's a word now. The gentrifiers, gentrificators. They're coming into this neighborhood, and you keep hearing them talk about it with each other or with their friends, like, oh, this really hip, emerging neighborhood. They use that word, emerging. And it blows my mind because it calls back the whole concept of cultural appropriation. Mm-hmm. And how when people steal from another culture and appropriate it, they act like because it's new to them, that, like, new to the people stealing it, I mean, that it's suddenly new in general. And, like, for example, when the Kardashians started wearing cornrows, and people are like, oh my gosh, this is so hip. I think, like, Elle magazine was like, this is so trendy. Look at Khloe Kardashian and her boxer braids. Black people have been wearing cornrows since the dawn of time. But suddenly, because the Kardashians are doing it, it's trendy, it's new, it's emerging. And so that specific word, I love that Alyssa Cole chose that, because it's just very appropriate. Just because it is new to you does not mean it is new. And just because you've deemed it cool and exciting or cool, trendy, exciting, what have you, you do not get to like take ownership of that.
Right.
And so, yeah, that was something that I had a big problem with. And I was really happy she chose that particular verbiage because I feel like it was appropriate.
Yeah, and it just like it completely discounts Black people's experiences. Like I remember being in the 7th grade, and I've been wearing braids since I was a baby, y'all. I'm like I said, I'm gonna braid my hair
dawn
tomorrow.
of time.
Yeah, it's just it's useful. If you don't know, like as Black people, it helps us to grow our hair and just experiment with our hair, our texture. Yeah, that's just like what I know. It's a cultural thing, right? And I'll never forget, like I was feeling myself. I had got some new braids. I convinced my parents to get me some new Vans. I had to have the JanSport backpack because that's what was popping at the times. And so I showed up to school, and like the school bully, if you will. This is so, I promise you, I'm not making this up. This literally happened. For the purposes of the podcast, I'll call him Bill. So Bill sees me feeling myself, and this is kind of like what we were talking about earlier with this whole idea of a power play. Like I was minding my business. I was with my friends, and he was like, "Oh, India, I see you over there looking like Lil Wayne with your dreads, with your dreads." Pause. Like, and I just remember feeling like I got punched because suddenly, again, I don't like attention. All eyes are on me. All of his friends are looking, laughing. And like, I think I was like speechless in that moment, embarrassed, probably holding back tears. And like my friends came to my defense and they were just cussing him out kind of deal. And
always looking to knock people a peg down.
Yeah.
It's like the power move, putting you back in the place they deem you to be in.
Like I was minding my own business. They're not even dreads. First of all, educate yourself. And I'm like, there's so many things wrong with that. Like I identify with she, her pronouns. I'm a woman. So to compare me to a grown man as I'm like, I don't know, 12, 13, like what is wrong with you? And I know this is learned behavior. I can only imagine what his parents are like.
Yeah.
So
this book, it tackles so much in these 352 pages. Like, I highly recommend it. And, you know, for some people, it might be a little bit triggering if these are things that you've said or done before. And I feel like, you know, with the height of the BLM, like, I don't want to say, like, movement because it's been a movement for years.
It's our life.
It's our life, yes. And so, but just, you know, with kind of what happened over the summer and people starting to do a little bit more self-reflection, I feel like a problem is if you've said or done something in the past, it's okay to learn and educate, apologize, and move on. Like you don't have to stay in your little bubble. And so while there may be certain things brought up that might make people feel defensive or things that we said that made you feel defensive, just read the book, educate yourself about what gentrification is, what cultural appropriation is, what is happening in the Black community, to just try to understand where we're coming from, where this book is coming from. Everyone's trying to like put the defenses down and just actually listen to what Alyssa Cole is saying, because I feel like this is a very important book.
And I want to just say, in doing that, what Soraya just said, we can begin to hopefully move towards a future where we're breaking these generational cycles and starting to move towards, you know, some type of growth, some type of positive future for, you know, our kids and the kids and just future generations, because the same thing keeps happening.
Yes, it's a cycle. It is a cycle.
And if you just want to do further research, I mentioned this earlier, but you can Google the term scientific racism. I'd also recommend Eminent Domain. That comes up. I also studied a lot of that when I was making my short film my junior year. And also the term redlining is relevant.
Yes, and we're going to have a few resources in the show notes because, like, I do think there's definitely some education that needs to be had here. And so we'll have some resources you can click on, learn, read the book, please, oh please. And we will see you for our next episode.
Thank you guys so much for hanging out with us today. For more updates, you can be sure to follow us on Twitter at BookSolidPod, on Instagram at BookSolidPodcast, like us on Facebook at BookSolidPodcast, and also join our group.